Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm Marina Gosu from Washington, D.C. Here are the latest headlines from around the world. Pope Francis is calling the faithful to accept the Holy Spirit as the guide leading the whole Christian community towards unity. The Holy Father spoke to members of the International Commission for Dialogue between the disciples of Christ and the Catholic Church on Wednesday. According to the Pope, Christian unity results from walking together and remaining receptive to the Spirit's role in creating harmony amid differences. The Holy Spirit, according to Pope Francis, is what keeps the Christian community vibrant and is the true protagonist of the mission. It is in this spirit that we find the courage to continue praising and magnifying God's name, the Pope added. Meanwhile, the Vatican issued a joint letter encouraging all church actors involved in the mission of education to address the new daunting challenges Catholic schools face worldwide. The U.S. Catholic bishops have urged members of Congress not to distort the faith in response to a public statement made on June 24th, in which 31 members of Congress cited teachings of the Catholic Church to defend abortion. Archbishop Timothy Broglio, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, said that members of Congress who invoked teachings of the Catholic faith to justify abortion are grievously distorting the faith. In a statement, the U.S. bishop said it is wrong and incoherent to claim that the taking of innocent human life at its most vulnerable stage can ever be consistent with the values of supporting the dignity and well-being of those in need. The bishop said human life must be respected and protected absolutely from the moment of conception. The bishops implored and prayed for Congress to join them in working towards the true common good by prioritizing authentic, uplifting support for the vulnerable and marginalized, including mothers and families in need. The Biden administration will spend over $50,000 in taxpayer money to support a foreign organization's efforts to spread transgender ideology in the Indian workplace and persuade businesses to adopt pro-transgender practices. The U.S. State Department reportedly funded an Indian-based organization to raise awareness of gender dysphoric individuals among corporate workers and promote pro-transgender policies. The funding was given to the Y.R. Gaytonde Medical, Educational, and Research Foundation on May 30th, which will expire next year. The State Department claimed the grant is meant to help fulfill U.S. foreign policy goals and objectives, advance national interests, and strengthen national security. In addition to this amount, the State Department will also provide the group with an extra $42,125 in non-federal funding. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi and Kremlin advisor Yuri Ushakov focused on refugees, especially children, during their meeting on Wednesday. According to Archbishop Paolo of Moscow, the foreign policy advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Papal envoy on the Ukraine war discussed humanitarian issues, particularly the refugee crisis. Pezzi told TASS news agency that the meeting between the Cardinal and Ushakov was successful and productive, and humanitarian concerns for refugees, including children, were the main focus. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for the Kremlin, had previously stated that the two would talk about the situation surrounding the war in Ukraine and potential diplomatic and political settlement. On Tuesday, the Vatican stated that the fundamental goal of the meeting was to promote humanitarian deeds that would aid in ending the conflict. The latest ceasefire during the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha in Sudan between the army and the rapid support forces failed to hold ground as fighting flared in the capital. The paramilitary rapid support forces and the Sudanese armed forces are still at odds in the country's ongoing conflict. And despite the growing bloodshed, both sides blame each other for starting the war. A 48-hour unilateral truce was announced earlier this week by Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, the head of the Rapid Support Forces, and it started on Tuesday. He declared that his troops would hold their positions and use force solely to defend themselves while announcing the release of 100 army captives. Google removed a pride and drag show from a list of company-promoted events in the U.S. state of California after hundreds of Christian employees signed a petition calling the event an attack on religious beliefs. The petitioners said that the event scheduled to be held at the LGBTQ+ bar Beau in San Francisco disrespects the Christian faith. Pro-life groups have expressed their dismay over the lawmakers voting to force all public schools in Northern Ireland to include abortion in the curriculum. The regulation to teach children aged 11 to 16 about abortion was passed in the House of Commons by 373 votes in favor to 28 votes against. Pro-life organization Right to Life decried the move as disappointing. The new regulations mandate students receive education on access to abortion, and the teachers who morally oppose the procedure would not have the freedom to opt out from teaching the subject. Various conservative lawmakers strongly opposed the regulations when the House of Commons' second Delegated Legislation Committee discussed it. Several bills that strengthen families in South Dakota will go into effect on July 1st. Republican Governor Kristi Noem signed 211 bills during the 2023 legislative session. This year's bills address issues like funding for prisons, pro-life and pro-family legislation, and tax savings. Governor Noem said that South Dakota will continue to strengthen families and promote life, and said they are making it easier for South Dakotans to start and build their families regardless of their circumstances. Senate Bill 75 provides for all pregnancy expenses to be covered by both parents. The governor also proposed in her budget that state employees receive a new benefit to cover up to $25,000 in domestic adoption costs. The governor has also updated state employee benefits to expand paid family leave opportunities for state employees. The Mexican Bishops' Conference issued a statement urging the free exercise of religious freedom, given the risk that the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation may forbid nativity scenes on public property. In the discussion that will take place in the Supreme Court on nativity scenes, the bishops called on the justices to ensure religious freedom. The bishops wrote that religious freedom is not limited to worship, but rather goes far beyond it, embracing freedom of thought, conscience, and expression. They said that this has been recognized in the Mexican Constitution and international treaties. The Mexican bishops stressed the importance of understanding the secular state openly and collaboratively without denying any possibility of social and community expression of religious beliefs. Democratic lawmakers in Michigan gave final approval to legislation that prohibits so-called conversion therapy for minors. The law prohibits mental health practitioners from providing counseling in accordance with the biological sex to children with gender dysphoria. The Michigan Senate passed the ban on a vote of 21 to 15, with one Republican voting with the Democrats. The therapy bill is currently awaiting final approval from Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who has previously referred to it as a dangerous practice. Michigan will become the 22nd state to ban so-called conversion therapy if signed by Governor Whitmer. The governor issued an executive order in 2021 that forbade the use of state and federal funds for so-called conversion therapy on minors. The organization Caritas invested a record amount of over 450 million euros in the growth of its projects in Spain and international collaboration initiatives, particularly in Ukraine. This represents an increase of 13.4% over the previous year. In 2022, Caritas Spain increased the budget allocated to international cooperation projects by 26%, which has benefited more than 1.2 million people, including the homeless, the elderly, families, children, and youth across the world. An investigation into suspected violations of human rights in the South American nation of Venezuela may now proceed, according to a decision by the International Criminal Court. The court's ruling comes after the inquiry into torture extrajudicial killings, and other crimes was put on hold in April 2022 at Venezuela's request so that the nation could launch its own investigation. However, the International Criminal Court ruled in a statement that Venezuela had not done enough in its probe of government officials. The court observed periods of unexplained investigative inactivity in Venezuela's probe, as well as failures to sufficiently address questions of persecution and crimes of a sexual nature. It shared concerns that the Venezuelan investigation focused primarily on lower-level perpetrators instead of senior-level officials. International human rights monitoring group Human Rights Watch welcomed the ruling. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and a record number of 180 members of parliament attended the National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast. Almost 700 people gathered to pray, worship, and hear Dr. Amy Orr-Ewing discuss the need for forgiveness in public life in Westminster Hall on Tuesday. This year's theme was Power and Forgiveness in Public Life for the annual event sponsored by the Premier and arranged by the Christians in Parliament All-Party Parliamentary Group. Parliamentarians Lord Stunnell, Lord Weir of Ballyholme, and Carol Monaghan MP led the prayers for the government, parliamentarians, British society, and the world. And those are your latest headlines. Join us again tomorrow for more. You can also visit swnews.org for more updates. Shalom.